What is the topic here? Achilat keva wa achilat arai, sukkah utfilin. We know there is a concept of achilat arai or seudat arai, which means a temporary, casual meal, as opposed to achilat keva, as opposed to a regular meal. What's a regular meal? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. What a person sits down and eats whatever number of times a day it is. As opposed to achilat arai, which is a kind of a snack. Now, this concept comes up in a couple of places. First of all, you see in the sheet before you, in Aleph, Ot Aleph, you have the quote from the Mishnah, Masechet Sukkah, Uchelim v'shotim arai hus la sukkah. So the Mishnah tells you that you are allowed to eat and drink arai, in other words, not a fixed meal, not a regular meal, but a snack, a bite of something or drink something outside the sukkah during Sukkot. And in the same, well, from this you understand that you cannot sleep, even a nap outside the sukkah. Eating and drinking, yes. Sleeping, no. That's what the Mishnah and the Talmud state. Now, the obvious question becomes: okay, so what is arai? What is a casual snack? How do you define that? So the Talmud Bavli asks this question as well, and it says over there on Daf Kaf Waw, "V'chama achilat arai." This is still Ot Aleph. Amar Rav Yosef, talte tolaf. That's the correct. Thank you very much. That's the correct girsa. Talte tolaf. 2, 3. Which, in other words, 2 or 3. 2 or 3 what? We'll see in a moment. Amar le Abaye. Well, for now I'll just say 2 or 3 bites. Amar le Abaye. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, wait a second. Wahazim imsagiin sagele inish behache. Wahawale sudat keva. Sometimes a person has just a few bites, and that basically is that ends up being their breakfast or their lunch. They're not going to eat lunch on top of that again. So that was their lunch. That was their meal. They were in a rush, whatever. That was sufficient. Ela mar Abaye. So therefore, I don't agree with what you just said, Rav Yosef. Not 2 or 3 bites, as we'll see in a moment. Ela kuda ta'im bar berav wa'ayel echala. In other words, and we'll see how Rashi explains this beautifully. And the halakha is like Abaye. What does that mean? Ta'im bar berav. Bar berav is a student of Torah, a Tamid Chachamim, a yeshiva student. Wa'ayel echala. In other words, such a person gets up in the morning, he davens, he's hungry, which is normal in the morning, but he wants to rush off to the Beit Midrash to get there in time for the SHIUR, and he hasn't got time to sit down and have a whole spread, so he has a bite of something and he runs off. And Rashi, Rabbeinu Shlomo Zichron Livracha, explains as follows. I quote Rashi also correctly and precisely, all as it appears in the regular Tfusim. Tarte tolath, not tarte ot tolath, that's the girsa. Rashi explains, Shtayim or shalosh pa'amim yiten letoch piu. In other words, he puts into his mouth 2 or 3 bites of whatever it is. Let's assume for now we're talking about bread. He also uses a lovely word that many of us will recognize, morsel or whatever, which is morsels in English. It's the same word in ancient French apparently, which means bites. In other words, Rashi says, let's say he has some bread, he grabs a little piece of bread, puts it in his mouth, he does it 2 or 3 times, and that's it, and that's all he has time for, and that is 2 or 3. 2 or 3 what? 2 or 3 bites of bread. Abaye said to him, to Rav Yosef, sometimes a person gets by on 2 or 3 bites of bread. It's 7 in the morning, he runs off, he's busy. He doesn't get a chance to eat lunch till 12. And basically that was his breakfast. So that's not a achilat arai, that's an achilat keva. That was his breakfast. So what does Abaye say? Rashi says, "Kedata'im bar berav wa'ayel echala baboker in the morning k'sholchim levet hamidrash." Take note of how beautiful and how concise and how beautiful Machon's Rashi is, and he's describing a Jewish reality. What does such a person do in the morning? He goes to the Beit Midrash. And he doesn't know how long the SHIUR will be, and there'll be questions, and he has a chevruta, he doesn't know, and he doesn't want to discover and find himself at 12 o'clock not having eaten anything at all. So he has a bite of something quickly, not 2 or 3 bites, just a bite. And therefore he takes as much as you can put into his mouth in one go, and drinks something small, and he runs off. So in other words, that's less than 2 or 3 bites. Rabbeinu Hananel writes in his Perush, Rav Yosef Amar Shtaim V'Shalosh L'Chimoth, swallows. In other words, you see also clearly from this, not only Rashi, this is Rashi's Girsa, as I said, Tarteh Toloth. Not because in the Gemara before us it says Tarteh or Toloth Be'eh, which means 2 or 3 eggs worth. But that's not what the original Girsa was, as we see from Rashi. And we also see in Rabbeinu Hananel says, Rav Yosef Amar Shtaim V'Shalosh L'Chimoth. If Rabbeinu Hananel had been Gores, Shtaim Trei or Telath Be'eh, 2 or 3 eggs worth in volume, the volume of 2 or 3 eggs, then he wouldn't write L'Chimoth, swallows, bites. He would have written Betzim, Be'eh, in Aramaic. Then there's also 1 or 2 Kitvei Yad that I checked that also have that Girsa. And the Tosafot also mentioned this Girsa. That's the Girsa in many of the books, like Rashi. So it's clear to me that's the correct Girsa. So Rav Yosef said, Tartet Tolath, in other words, 2 or 3 morsels he puts in his mouth, that's what he has time for, and he runs off to, and that's a achilat harai. Anything more is already breakfast, a regular breakfast. And Abaye says sometimes even 2 or 3 is all a person gets a chance to eat in the morning, and that's his breakfast. A lot of people are in that situation. You know, they get up, they run off, maybe they buy a coffee, maybe they buy some small little cake, a cupcake or something very small, and that's all they get a chance to eat till lunchtime. So Abaye says no, not 2 or 3, just whatever he can put into his mouth at one time, one mouthful. That's the shiur of achilat harai. That's a casual snack. And the halakha is like Abaye. There's no argument about that. But we still don't know lichora how much that is exactly. How much is melo piu, what one fits into one's mouth. So we have another statement of the Mishnah, next halakha. It says, Rabbi Tzadok ochel pahot mikabesa. Once on Sukkot, they gave to Rabbi Tzadok, apparently this is Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen, food, which means bread, less than the volume of an egg, pahot mikabesa. If you want to know how much a besa is, I'll tell you. In the time of Chazal, an average chicken's egg was no more than 48 cc in volume. We know that for a number of reasons. The average egg today in Israel is, well, it depends. I think at least once upon a time they used to have large, medium and small eggs. I don't think I've ever seen the small or even the medium any longer for a long time. I think they only have large nowadays. The large ones are on average about 60 cc. The smaller ones, and I know this because once many years ago I checked these things, and I actually deliberately went and bought some small eggs, eggs that were labeled as small, and they were noticeably smaller than most of the eggs that you would buy. And as I recall, they were about 45, 48 cc. And you can actually get smaller eggs than that as well. Once I was able to obtain some eggs from black Middle Eastern chickens, as opposed to white Dutch chickens, which are the ones that lay most of our eggs. So the white Dutch chickens are very large, big chickens, and therefore they're big eggs. There's about 500 types of chickens in the world, by the way, literally. And these are some of the bigger ones, these white Dutch chickens that they brought here about 100 years ago or more to start raising eggs. But the standard little scrawny black Middle Eastern chicken that you can still find in Arab villages, produce very small eggs. very small, even closer to 40 cc. So, but for now, let's say an egg, the volume of an egg is about 48 cc. As it was in the time of Chazal, that's what Chazal were talking about. And it was also true in the time of the Rambam, for example, and also probably true in Rashi's time and place as well. So it says they brought to Rabbi Yitzhak some food, bread, less than a besa, netalo b'mapa. He did not do netilat yadayim, which also proves we're talking about bread. Otherwise, why would you need to? Netalo b'mapa. He picked it up in a serviette, in a napkin. He picked it up and didn't do netilat yadayim. V'achalo hus lasukkah. And he ate it outside the sukkah. V'lo v'recha hara. He didn't say birkat hamazon afterwards, because according to Rabbi Tzadok, and there are others she talked like this also amongst the Tanaim, that less than a kebetza, you're not chayav birkat hamazon, you're not chayav netilat yadayim. That was Rabbi Tzadok's shita. So he ate less than a kebetza of bread on Sukkot, outside the sukkah, did not do netilat yadayim, and did not say birkat hamazon, which proves that it is mutar to eat less than a kebetza outside the sukkah of bread. We're talking about bread. So based on this ma'aseh that's mentioned in the Mishnah, the Talmud Bavli says over there, Daf Kav Zayin, ha kabetza b'es sukkah. So from this we see that if it is not less than a kabetza, but it's a betza or more, it's the volume of an egg or more than that, you do have to eat it in the sukkah. You can't eat, shall we say, a slice of bread outside the sukkah. That's definitely more than a betza, and you can't do that outside the sukkah. Lema tehewe tiyuvta Rav Yosef wa Abaye. Should we understand from this that this is a refutation of what Abaye and Rav Yosef said, because according to them, according to Rav Yosef, you could have 2 or 3 mouthfuls, which is definitely, as we're about to see, more than an egg. And according to Abaye, at least 1 big mouthful, which is the same as an egg, by the way, as we're about to see. But according to Rabbi Tzadok, he only did this because it was less than a betza. But if it had been a betza, the equivalent of 1 egg in volume, then he wouldn't have done this. So 1 betza is asur, less than a betza is mutar. But they said, both Rav Yosef and Abaye said that at least a betza is mutar. So the Gemara says, Dilma pachut mikabesa natila avracha lava'eh, ha kabesa ba'eh natila avracha. The fact that the Mishnah stressed that it was less than a besa, not in order to imply that the SHIUR that one may eat outside of a sukkah is only less than a besa, but not equivalent to 1 besa. The reason they stressed that fact that it was pahuth mikabesa was to explain why he didn't do netilat yadayim, why he didn't say birkat hamazon. Because less than a besa, you're not chayav to do those 2 things. But in terms of eating in the sukkah, actually up to a besa, not just less than a besa, but even kabesa is mutar. That's what the Talmud states over there. So there's no proof from this statement of Rabbi Tzadok, or this ma'aseh of Rabbi Tzadok, that there is no proof to be brought from this against the shita, either of Rav Yosef or Abaye. Okay. What did Rashi say? Rabbeinu Shlomo says as follows, Hachi Gorsenan, on Daf Kav Zayin, Nema tehewe tiyuvte Rav Yosef, Damar le'el tartei thalath. You see Rashi here again is gores tartei thalath. By the way, I checked this also in the Tfus Rishon. It says tartei thalath, and also in the Ktav Yad, in the Perush Rashi, we have Ktav Yad of Perush Rashi, or many Kitav Yad actually. And I have a book of Rashi al Sukkah al Pi Kitav Yad, and this is the Girsa as it appears here. Tartei thalath. So Rav Yosef said 2 or 3 mouthfuls, or bites, or whatever. Abaye da'amar kedeta'im barberav da'hainu kabesa. See, here Rashi says mefurash. The SHIUR that Abaye was referring to is a kabesa. How does Rashi know this? The kabesa ochel ha'ne'echal b'vli ahathu. The kabesa ochel ha'ne'echal b'vli ahathu. In other words, a kabesa, the volume of an egg, is the volume of food that one can swallow in one go, at one time. How does Rashi know? It says over there, based on the pasuk, Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. The Lashon of the Talmud over there is as follows: Ochel shata ochelo bevat ahath, v'shi'aru hachamim en bet ha'biliam mahazik yoter mibesav tanur golef. In other words, an average human being can swallow at one time up to, and certainly no more than, the volume of one egg. If you try to swallow more than that, you will literally be endangering your life. And if you needed any other further proof that the doubled shiur of the Chazon Ish and others is incorrect, this is sufficient proof, because it's not possible to eat 90 or 100 or more cc and swallow at one time. It's not humanly possible. You're unlikely to survive. If you do, you'll be in hospital. So you'll probably choke. So Rashi says, "Hakabesa ba'in natilat yadayim uvracha." So if the food that Rabbi Sadok had been handed, the bread, was kabesa, he would have been chayav b'natilat yadayim and brikat hamazon. But because it was less than, it was a very small piece. It was a very small piece of bread, like a couple of 2 or 3 kazaytim. A kazayit is 3 cc. So it could be 3, 4, even 5 cc. What's 5 times 3? 15 cc. It's not much at all, right? It can even be 6. Or whatever, it could be 10. It still would be a lot less than the volume of one egg. But when it comes to sukkah, you don't need a sukkah for less than a kabesa. That explains what Rabbi Sadok did. Okay, Beseda, we understand. So Rashi has said explicitly to us that the amount described by Abaye as kedeta'im bar berav hu'ayel lechala, the amount that a Talmid Chachamim will grab in the morning because he has no time, he's running off to the yeshiva, to the Bet Midrash, to hear the shiur from the Rav, and he wants to get there in time, he wants to be in the first row, he doesn't want to be late, so he just grabs something that he can grab in one go, takes a bite and a sip of water, and he runs off. That is a kibitza. That amount is a kibitza. That's what can be swallowed in one go. That's what he does. The Tosafot in Ot Hey also say something on this. Tephilin, they too, that's the girsa in the Tosafot, without the word O. Peresh b'kuntre shtayim or shalosh pa'amim yiten lathoch piu morsel belaz, a morsel. Now, there was a morsel, as we know, just means something small you can put in your mouth. There are books, there are copies of the Talmud that we have that state 3 eggs worth, but in fact it all comes to the same. So we understand that as Rashi said, the shiur of beta bli'ah, what a person can swallow is up to a besa. And that's what Abaye was talking about. That's the amount that a person can bite off and run off and swallow on the way. Ulevasov masik, and the halacha is kedeta'im thurba midrabanan wazel lechala shezeh malo piu, what a person can put into his mouth in one go. Dahainu kabesa, that's the shiur of the besa. Okay. With shiur ze dauka b'faf. By the way, this Tosafot point out is referring to bread only. The pereh lau ba'osuka. But if you want to eat, let's say, an orange. Let's say a person loves oranges, and every day their breakfast is to eat 4 oranges. Let's just say. You can have 4 oranges outside the sukkah, even though it's a great deal more than a kabesa. It's not a problem. When we're talking about this halacha, it refers to bread, but not pereh, not other types of food. In other words, the type of food that you may eat outside the sukkah, you can eat as much as you like of it. So you can have a big bowl of salad, like you can fill that bowl over there full of salad, and eat it outside the sukkah. In other words, whatever you wish to eat of other things is considered like achilat haray of path. Fine, so we understand this is referring to bread, and we're talking about a shiur of blissa. Rambam writes as follows: Othwell, achilat haray, Rambam says in his Perush on the Mishnah here in Sukkah, hu sheyochal kamuth mu'atat v'lo yithkawen bo sheyeh seuda. So Rambam is giving a very general conceptual interpretation, not being specific here in terms of amount. He says achilat haray is what a person grabs on the run, basically, because they don't want to be terribly hungry afterwards. But they don't intend it should be their meal, either their breakfast or their lunch, whatever. That's not their intention. Their intention is to have a bite of something now so they can go off and do whatever they have to do for 2 hours and then have breakfast. He only eats it now to somehow sate his hunger, so that and he will be able to have a real meal later. But in Hilchot Sukkah, Rambam writes more specifically based on our sugya. One may not eat a suda outside. Now, a suda, by the way, you always have to understand, both Chazal and the Rambam, the word suda, you should always see in your mind, equals lehem, equals bread. When the word suda means bread. All 7 days of Sukkot, you may not eat a meal, which means bread, in the Sukkah, outside the Sukkah, I'm sorry. Unless it was just a small snack. And Rambam here is more specific. Or a little bit more or less, but around a betza. And obviously Rambam took this from our sugya that we just saw. This statement also appears in Talmud Yerushalmi, Od Zayin, Sechet Berachot. It says, Rabbi Za'ira, B'Shem Abba Bar Yirmiyah, Ochel Bahen, in other words, whilst wearing tefillin, Ochel Bahen Achilat Arai, We'no Ochel Bahen Achilat Keva. A person may eat, take a bite of something, a small snack, a temporary bite of something, whilst wearing tefillin. You don't have to remove your tefillin, but you may not have a regular standard meal. Yashen bahem shinaf arai, we'no yashen bahem shinaf keva. And the same applies to sleeping. This is important, this point, because there are two, and that's why the title here speaks about sukkah and tefillin. There are two issues here. One is achilat arai, one is shenaf arai. May you take a nap whilst wearing tefillin. So it says, Yashen behem shinaf arai, you may take a small nap, which is a point which would require some more details perhaps, but you're allowed to shut your eyes for a few minutes, shall we say, whilst wearing tefillin. So you can put your head on the table, shall we say, or whatever. Or as it says in the Talmud and the Rambam, Samet Rosho ben Birkau, you place your head between your knees and you drop off for a minute. But you may not sleep a real sleep whilst wearing tefillin. Okay, now. And that which applies that which applies to sukkah, lichora, also applies to tefillin, because as we just saw in the Yerushalmi, and this is also discussed in the Bavli, but I didn't bring it here, just right after the discussion in the Talmud Bavli in Sukkah about eating outside the Sukkah, it also discusses sleeping and eating with regards to tefillin, mainly sleeping. So these things are related. In other words, achilat harai, shenat harai almost always go together. And that means that, according to this, achilat harai, everything we've seen now, leads us to the following maskana, the following conclusion. Achilat harai is not any amount a person claims that, well, I'm just eating this now, but I don't intend this to be my breakfast. I intend to have breakfast in a couple of hours, and yet we see him sitting down having, a nice big bread roll and full lots of cheese and salad. And he tells me this is just a small snack. I'm very sorry, that's not a small snack. That's breakfast. Maybe you have a big appetite and you're going to eat twice that amount in 2 hours. That's fine. Also, but that's not an achilat harai. And achilat harai is something which has been described clearly by Chazal. We saw in Rashi, Tosafot, Rambam. There's no argument about this. Achilat harai is up to and including a besa or even a drop more. Muriya Rav Gafeh writes that it's even an egg and a third. Okay, because if it's an egg and a half, it's already considered more than an egg. It's more like 2 eggs. But an egg and a third is like a besa or ma'at. Okay, because Rambam says ma'at, right? Rambam says ka besa or pahot or yather ma'at. So it says up to a third of an egg is still considered a ma'at, a small amount. So all right, just over an egg, but not more than that. That's not a lot of food, right? If a person, you wake up in the morning, you just have, let's say, a standard loaf of, angel's bread or something, whatever. And besa is about less than half a slice, maybe a third of a slice. Okay, so it's not a lot of food, but it's enough not to be very hungry for a couple of hours at least, shall we say, for most people. So that's achilat harai. That's why it says in the Gemara elsewhere that if a person sits down and has all kinds of beautiful pitot and things and what have you, and he tells you this is achilat harai, we tell him en davar kazeh. That's not how it works. This is breakfast. You want to have another breakfast? Breakfast 2.0, that's fine also. But this is breakfast. So up to that amount is achilat harai. Now, so what about, and that is said in the context of sukkah. What about sleeping? What about tefillin? When it says ochel behem achilat arai, which is agreed to also by the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, it appears in all the Posukim, it appears in the Rambam, in the Torah, in the Shulchan Aruch. So lichora the same should apply with regards to tefillin. You are allowed to eat that amount of bread in tefillin. More than that, lichora, you have to remove your tefillin. Okay? Now, I didn't quote here, I see another Gemara that I should have quoted here, but I'll tell you Ba'al Peh what it is. It says in Masechet Barachot in the Bavli Daf Kaf Gimel, it says Hanichnas the Sudat Keva Holes Tefilo. A person is entering a meal, which usually means with other people, like it's a gathering of people together, they're having a meal together. He removes his tefillin. And Rashi there says Shema yishtaker v'yitganeh b'tefilo, lest he drink wine at the meal and become drunk, and that's v'day asur in tefillin. It's asur to be drunk in general, but it's v'day even more asur to be drunk whilst wearing tefillin. And at such a meal, certainly drinking wine was normal, was standard. It wasn't standard that you would get drunk, not at all. In fact, it's asur to get drunk anytime, Purim included. But if people are drinking wine, it's possible that someone will drink too much. So, and Rashi says, interestingly enough, over there in Masechet Barachot, that you have to remove your tefillin when entering a Sudat Keva, because you may drink wine and you may become drunk, or shall we say tipsy or something like that. What does that imply? That if you're not drinking wine, you don't have to remove. You don't have to remove your. No, it's okay. It's just the battery is dead. You don't have to remove your tefillin if you're not going to drink wine. You would think, correct? Now, this is something that that's the implication lichora from what Rashi is saying. There are a couple of questions. How does Rashi know that is the reason? Maybe that's not the reason. Maybe the reason is that if you're just taking a bite of something, you're not going to be Masech Tadat, because you're in the middle of things, you're running, you're busy, so you just grab a few of these and something over there and you run, you're not going to be Masech Tadat. But if you sit down to a meal, whatever, that's already something that's going to take some time, and that's already Heseh Hadat. Heseh Hadat is something that's also in tefillin. In other words, for your mind to be completely elsewhere. So I saw that Gaon Rabbi Yosef Shalom El Yashiv Zetzal writes about this as follows. He writes, "Varashi piresh shehu mishum shema yishtaker v'yitganem b'tefila. Hazenan she'i lo hay ta'ama." Were not for this reason, according to Rashi, "Shara le'echol b'sha'a shelavush b'tefilin." It is mutar to sit and to have even a regular meal whilst wearing tefillin. So you would think based on Rashi, which is true. Lichora, you would think so. Ulechach, writes Rabbi Yashiv, Ulechach b'makom she'eno ochel sudat keva, u'adai yachol le'echol b'zman she'atur hu b'tefillin. So if a person is now, it's not clear from what he writes here, because Lichora, what he should be saying is, even if you eat a sudat keva but you're not drinking wine, it should be mutar. Lichora, that's what he's getting at. ולכך במקום שאינו אוכל סעודת קבע, הוא עדיין יכול לאכול בזמן שעטור הוא בתפילין, ואף על פי שמסיח דעתו על ידי זה מן התפילין, אין בכך כלום, שהרי אפילו שינה בתפילין לא אסרו מצד היסח הדעת, אלא משום גזירה שמייפיח בהם. וכל הקפדה של היסח הדעת הוא משום קלות ראש. And היסח הדעת is asur also shema, you will end up being מקל ראש. וכן איתה בהנהגות התם סופר שהיה שותה קפה עם תפילין. I'm afraid I don't understand this raya. It's all very true and all very well that Rabbeinu Hatam Sofer would drink a cup of coffee whilst wearing tefillin, but that has nothing to do with the Sudat Keva. So I don't understand the point of that remark. Ach yash, in other words, alcoholic beverages like whiskey, vodka, what have you. Pshita she'asur lishtot im tefillin. That's vadai asur. That's what Rabbi Yashiv Zitzal writes. I can also tell you that when I was a bahur in Yeshivat Mekaz Arav, I once discussed this very topic. Because I know everyone who reads that, looks at that Gemara, sees that Rashi, understands that Lichora, Rashi is saying, if you're not drinking wine, you can have a Sudat Keva in Tephilin. And I spoke to someone, Rav Moshe Harari, who told me that he spoke to Rav Mordechai Eliyahu Zitzal about this very topic. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, this is what he told me, said to him that if you don't drink wine with your meals usually, you're allowed to have a Sudat Keva whilst wearing Tephilin. That's basically what Rabbi Yashiv is saying also. Although Rabbi Yashiv didn't actually say so. What I would have expected Rabbi Yashiv to write would have been Lachen b'makom she'ochel sudat keva b'lo yain u'adai yachol le'echol, something like that. But anyhow, that's what I think what he meant. He was probably just writing quickly, and he probably wrote on the side of the Gemara somehow, or maybe someone didn't copy something correctly. That's clearly what he's getting at, correct? So lichora, today, if a person, and most of us do not generally drink wine with every meal. Maybe we do on festive occasions, Shabbat, Yom Tov, some other special occasion, whatever, but not at every meal, which in the time of Hazal, many people did. Certainly at gatherings, at get-togethers. I don't know if everyone did, every simple person did, in their midday meal, but when they got together with other people, they did drink wine as part of the meal, as people in France do, in Italy and other places as well. So, according to what Rashi says, and based on the fact that most of us do not usually consume wine with a regular weekday meal, you would think that you could eat a Sudat Keva even whilst wearing tefillin. Aval im kol zot lo naha da'ati b'chach. I'm not it doesn't seem quite right to me for the following reasons. First of all, it seems to me that not all the Rishonim, although some Rishonim quote Rashi, others do not. Specifically, the Rosh and the Tur, who always quote Rashi, and very often, as a rule, they quote Rashi's explanation of the halacha as well, especially if it has some nafkamina la halacha, as it does here. You would expect the Rosh to say, Piresh Rashi Shema Yishtaker. Right? And even if he didn't add to that, he would have just said Shema Yishtaker. I would have perhaps said, the Rosh also thinks that it's only Mishum Shichruth, but if there's no wine involved, you're not going to get drunk, Vadai Shilo, then that's not a problem. But he doesn't even quote Rashi. He just says, mutar le'echol aray, asur le'echol keva. The Torah, the same. He doesn't mention Shema Yishtaker, doesn't say any such thing. Rambam also, when he brings this in Perek Daled of Ilchot Tephilin, you pass me that Rambam and Doyak there behind you? This is also on the right, further right. There you go. That's right. This is my first chance to see the Sefer in the flesh, by the way. So in Ilchot Tephilin Perek Revi'i, Rambam writes, Hayu tefillah keruchim beyado. The person's tefillin, he removed the tefillin that he was wearing, he had them in his hand. Mutar lishon behem afilu shenat keva. One is allowed to sleep in that way, even to have a real sleep. Not wearing them, but to hold them in one's hand and fall asleep that way. You are only not allowed to eat in tefillin unless it's achilat aray, says Rambam. But if you literally enter a regular, in other words, a sit down to a regular meal, not a bite of something, holathan, you remove them beforehand, and you place them on the table or nearby next to you, in front of you, as it says in the Talmud over there, ken hadurlo, holathan umanihan al shulhano ad sheyitol yado, v'ahar kach yanihem u'yivrecha mezonah v'hulavush behen. So you remove them before eating, you put them on after eating, before saying birkat hamazon. Okay, Rambam doesn't mention why. Rambam doesn't hint at any such thing. There are many other Rishonim who also quote this halakha. They don't mention. Even though they clearly saw Rashi, they don't mention this business about wine. And the Pshat of the Lashon in the Talmud Yerushalmi says, "Ochel behen achilat aray, ve'eno ochel ben achilat keva." Now, from this I understand that this, and I think that from this statement in the Talmud Yerushalmi, you can clearly medayek that there is the ta'am is mishum heseh hada'at, not like Rabbi Elyashiv Zitzal writes. Rabbi Elyashiv wrote that it's the isur of eating a sudat keva betfilin is mishum hashash of kaluth rosh. In other words, even heseh hada'at is mishum kaluth rosh. But I'm not convinced of that at all. That's a separate discussion why I think so with regards to heseh hada'at of tefillin, but here in the Yerushalmi, you see, what does it say in Yerushalmi? It says, "Ochel b'machilat haray, ve'eno ochel b'menachat keva. Yashen b'hem shinat haray, ve'eno yashen b'hem shinat keva." The reason it's mutar to sleep shinat haray is, if it's aray, it's just a brief shut eye. It's not really a sleep. It's not really a serious sleep, and that's therefore not considered heseh hada'at. And also, as the Talmud explains, and chashash shema yafiach behem gam b'shinat aray. The fact that Yerushalmi mentions eating in tefillin and sleeping in tefillin in the same breath, lichora implies sha'ta'am hu echad. It's the same ta'am, that it's mishum heseh hada'at. And aray here is like aray there. That is mishum heseh hada'at. Not only mishum kaluth rosh or shema yishtaker. So even though from Rashi you might make that assumption, as I mentioned, Rabbi Eliyahu apparently did, and as Rabbi Elyashiv clearly did, but I'm not convinced that is a correct assumption. I'm not sure that the Machon, the Rambam or others would have agreed necessarily what Rashi writes. it's not that there's any clear proof against Rashi, but there's also no positive proof that it is so. And the fact that it says in a general way, Achilat hara is mutar and Shinat hara is mutar, mashma that it's all based on this idea of something being very brief and therefore not being as serious as hadat, because hadat by definition is a certain extended period of time. How extended is undefined. But if the Talmud states that Adam hayav Adam lemashmesh b'tfilah kol sha'ah, then you have to touch your tefillin every so often. What does that mean, every so often? It's also not defined. But the idea is that you shouldn't go, let's say, hours without remembering that you're wearing tefillin. So every so often you should be in the habit of touching your tefillin every so often. Every so often can be every half an hour, every so often could be every 40 minutes, it might be every 10 minutes also, but it's not every 3 hours. And the same is true, and therefore you may not have your mind exactly focused on the fact that you're wearing tefillin every moment, but every so often you remind yourself, and you remain aware of that fact. And the same is true. What's the difference between Shinat Ara and Shinat Keva? The Fashtut, first of all, is Heseh Hadat. Shinat Keva, a person really falls deeply asleep, well then you're obviously not aware of anything. And likely it'll be for some time. Once you fall asleep deeply, you may sleep for an hour or 2 or 3, hard to know. Whereas if you just put your head down on your arm on the table, shall we say, or put your Rosho Ben Birko between your knees, you're not going to sleep very long. You're not going to have more than a few minutes of shata in that stage, usually. So, Lichora, yesh makom lefakpek b'davar hazeh. So, with regards to sum up, with regards to Sukkah, it's clear that the SHIUR is up to a kabesa, which, if you want to be more specific, in present day terms, that's about, let's say, 48, 50 cc. Up to 50 cc in volume of bread or something like that, you can eat outside the sukkah.
And apples?
Apples?
Oranges?
No, that you can have more. That you can have more. You can have a kilo if you want. When it comes to tefillin, I'm not sure that there's a sufficient basis to say that you can have a Sudat Keva in tefillin as long as you're not drinking something alcoholic. I'm not convinced of that, shall we say? And I wouldn't therefore recommend it. But ani modeh, I agree that yesh al mi lismoch. We see that that's lichora, the implication from Rashi, quite clearly. Agon Rav Yashiv thought so clearly, and I heard it from this person many years ago, but I remember it very well. I can even tell you exactly where we were standing in the yeshiva when he said this to me. That's how I remember things. I always remember the physical place where it happened. He said to me, Rav Eliyahu said to me, if you don't drink wine, if there's no wine involved in the meal, it's mutar to eat a meal b'tefillin. So yesh al mi lismoch. אבל דעתי לא נחה בכך. That's what I wanted to run by you today on this matter. ובזה נעמוד להיום בעזרת השם.